Hi there, everyone. Welcome to another one of my expertise interviews. I'm Emily Crookston, owner and decider of all things at the Pocket PhD. I'm the ghostwriter for Rebels, Renegades, and Mavericks, and I love helping experts with big ideas get those ideas out of their heads and into the hands of their fans. Today, my guest is Gracy Obuchowicz. Gracy is the owner of Beautiful Life Self-Care. She's a self-care coach, community care facilitator, and author based in Washington, D.C. Gracy, thank you for speaking with me. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about who you work with and what you do?
Yes, thanks for having me, Emily. It's always edgy to talk about being an expert, but I love how much you push us to do that. So I'm here to own my expertise. Cool. And that expertise is around helping people with their self-care, which started with me teaching yoga, and then I wanted to go deeper with people. So I began to teach people about how to take their yoga off the mat, how to wake up in the morning, what to eat for lunch. And then that evolved into how do you have relationships with others? How do you communicate your needs? How do you set boundaries? And so what I do is I take a combination of those two elements. I think it has to be about the physical, but it also has to be about what's going on inside of ourselves, and then how we put that into our relationships and our community. And so I help overwhelmed professionals figure out new purpose using self-care.
I'm curious, do you have sort of tips that you share with people about how to find more time for self-care or how to make that a priority in your life?
Of course. And so what I found is what gets in the way is perfectionism. And that is the idea that we have to push ourselves really hard. We have to change something big about ourselves. And so I always like to say that no matter what we're doing, we just have to go small. And pushing ourselves really hard to take really good care of ourselves and feeling guilty after, that's not really self-care. So I think the self-care comes from just having a realistic look of our lives. This is who I am, and this is what's important to me, and these are my goals, and I'm going to move slowly. And then in terms of just tactical things, I think you should look at where you plug your phone in at night. I think it's a very small thing that it can make a huge difference, that if you're up late scrolling or first thing in the morning scrolling, if you put your phone in another room, that can make a really big difference. And I also like to encourage people to eat a bigger lunch. I think people, they eat a big dinner because our society tells us that that's the time we should eat. But actually, we have the most digestive bile midday. And if we eat a big dinner, it can be harder to wind down at night. It's harder for us to get to sleep. It's harder for us to have a good morning routine, which I think we can get a lot of self-care out of. And so I think when people talk to me about I want a morning routine, I'm like, let's talk about dinner. So backwards a little bit. So I say two things to look at would be eat a bigger lunch, a little bit of a smaller dinner, and plug your cell phone in somewhere away from where you sleep.
Oh, those are such great practical tips that people could implement starting today. So how would you describe your path to becoming an expert? You started talking a little bit about how you started doing yoga and then thinking about taking yoga off the mat. So I'd love to hear you expand on that.
Yeah, well, the place that I think I learned the most about self-care was growing up in a family where people did not practice a lot of self-care. There was addiction, mental health issues, I grew up in an environment where people were really not able to understand who they were. And as I got older, I started to look around at other people, and I'm like, other people are doing this thing, and it seems like their life is easier than mine. I had no words for it. I was just like, people are doing this differently than me. I was really trying to be as perfectionistic as possible, get the grades, get the opportunities, kind of minimize risks in my life. And all of that was just making me feel really lonely and not like myself. And so when I started practicing yoga, that was warmer. This is something that actually feels like this thing that other people have had, this vitality, this energy. And I just kept getting in that direction. And that has led me to studying Ayurveda. And that led me to creating my group coaching course, Self-Care 101, which I taught for years. And I taught women in this 10-week intensive program. And I just saw huge changes start to happen from taking some really simple things like eating a bigger lunch, plugging your cell phone in somewhere, and also having a community to support you and having a place to really grapple with the inner workings of our lives, which I don't think our society gives us a lot of good opportunity for. And from there, I really believe that self-care is the pathway to caring more about other people, to being able to create a world that's more equitable. And the way that I have found most recently that is effective to work on this is to work within organizations. So, and I think we're in this right now in like the Great Resignation. Everyone's reevaluating what work means, and I'm realizing how much we need to be building self-care in. Is like, this is the culture that we practice. This is how we encourage each other. This is a space where we can show up whole and like not be afraid of mistakes, but really learn together from mistakes. And I think that the evolutionary like potential in all of that is really huge.
Yeah, so I'd love it to hear, you explain briefly, Ayurveda, because I always associate it with like eating with the seasons and eating certain things at certain times, and I don't know, some kind of circadian rhythm, I suppose. Is that kind of your understanding, or how would you describe it?
Yeah, I think that's a great way to interpret Ayurveda. I mean, Ayurveda is really big. It's about 5,000-year-old science, and people in India mostly go to school like to become doctors in Ayurveda. It's very intricate. And I think the main teachings of Ayurveda are what you mentioned, which is that we as human beings are not separate from nature, which sounds kind of simple, but I don't think that, like, I was not socialized in that way. I thought nature is something you go enjoy and then you kind of come back to like humanity. So it's recognizing that we are connected to nature, and that when we fight that, we get out of alignment with ourselves. And to get back into alignment, we do something called dinacharya in Sanskrit, and that means daily rhythm, or like a daily rhythm that's connected to nature. Meaning you wake up with the sun, you go to bed, when it gets dark outside, that you vary your food with the seasons. So that's a really big and profound way to come into self-care.
Right.
And then the other big piece of Ayurveda is that we all have a different constitution. And you can get really into the Sanskrit about like the typology, and I think that's interesting. And there's a lot that can be learned. It's a little confusing, I'll be honest about that, to like know who you are constitutionally. But I think the beauty of that is recognizing that the self-care that works for you, Emily, is not going to be the exact self-care that works for me, Gracie. And also that self-care changes throughout your life. Like what I was doing 5 years ago in my life is really different than what I'm doing now. Some things are the same. And I think finding out what you always need to take with you on self-care is really important. But I think part of self-care is learning how to let go of certain habits, how to evolve your habits, how to recognize like this is just a different phase of life, how to reestablish a rhythm once you've lost it. I think everyone coming back from vacation kind of knows that. You're like, wait, how do I take care of myself? And just recognizing that part of the cycle is the like disruption of the cycle, and that's where a lot of growth can happen too.
And I think this connects really well with the next question. So what's your die in a ditch belief? And for the audience, the die in a ditch belief is something you've thought long and hard about. It'd be something you'd be willing to defend if you were pressed on it. Might be a little controversial, but it's something that draws a line in the sand for you. So I really appreciate your answer here, Gracie. What's your die in a ditch belief?
My die in a ditch belief, I love that phrase. I hadn't heard it before, is self-care is not selfish. Because I think like thinking of my family growing up, I'm like, they were not practicing self-care because they had been conditioned to think that if they focused on their needs, that would be selfish. Like you had to try to take care of everyone else. And that led to like a dysfunctional environment. And I look at myself when I've been at my most dysfunctional, and it's because I'm not tending to my needs, and I'm not of service to anyone else in that moment. I'm not inspiring to anyone else in that moment. And really I create a drain on other people's energy when I'm not focused and grounded and clear in myself. And I think this is where it's important to say, like, self-care it's not just the bubble baths and the massages, even though those have their place, because I think real self-care means about living by your values, setting boundaries, having discipline to like follow through on what you need to feel good.
Well, Gracie, I've really enjoyed chatting with you. Will you let people know how they can find you online?
Yes. Thank you, Emily. You can look for my website. It's selfcarewithgracy.com, and Gracie is spelled Gracy. And I have a podcast. It's called Self-Care with Gracie. And you can look that up. And I haven't been podcasting so much recently because of pandemic parenting, but I've had a podcast for 7 years now. So there's a huge backlog of episodes, a lot of amazing people I've had on to interview to check out about self-care. And as I mentioned, my book is Self Carefully. You can get it anywhere that you buy books. And I think if you're interested in what it would be like to start to see your life from more of a self-care framework, it's a good primer for that.